What's going on, my good people? Mike Hidalgo here. Thank you for joining us on another FCP Euro DIY. Today, we're going to be working on a 2008 Mercedes-Benz W211 E63 AMG. Today on the W211, we're going to be covering how to replace your rear shock absorbers. This DIY is going to be applicable to your E55 AMG from 2003 to 2006, your CLS55 AMG for the year of 2006 only, your CLS63 AMG from 2007 to 2011, and an E63 AMG like the one behind me from 2007 to 2009. In front of me, we have a Bilstein kit, which is available on fcpeuro.com. It's going to include both of the rear shock absorbers as well as all the hardware needed to do this install. Typically, you're not going to have any problems with the aromatic suspension until about 100 to 120,000 miles. This vehicle's at 135,000 miles behind us, so it's just about due for these rear shocks. But before we get started on this DIY, let's take a look at some of the tools we're going to need for this job. And now for tools. For this job, we're going to be using two torque wrenches. We have a 1/2-inch drive and a 3/8 drive. We have a 1/2-inch drive ratchet as well as a 3/8 drive ratchet. To go along with those, we have a 17mm socket, a 16, a 10, as well as an 8. We also have a T40. We have some pliers that are going to help us remove some plastic rivets, two small picks. I have two 16mm wrenches, just a flathead screwdriver, which may come in handy for prying some items, a paint marker so we can torque down everything and know that we've torqued it. And then I highly recommend you get yourself a pass-through socket set whenever you're doing some sort of suspension work. This is CTA7466. Comes with both the 16 and the 17mm sockets that we're going to be needing, as well as a counterhole tool. And then some nice to haves are electric tools. We have an electric ratchet as well as an electric impact. And since we are working on the lift, we're using a screw jack. However, you can also use a floor jack if you're working at home in the garage or in the driveway. Now we know what tools we're working with. Let's go ahead and get started on this DIY. All right, my good people, today we are going to work on the rear passenger side of the W211. However, the steps are going to be identical for both the left and right side. To get started, we're going to start by removing our wheel using a 17mm lug socket. This car is equipped with studs on this side. However, you should have traditional lug bolts unless you have retrofitted them like this car has. Alrighty, with the wheel off, we have a better view of where we're going to be working. Our next step here is going to be to remove our fender liner so we have access to the electrical connector that goes to our rear shock. So we're going to grab a 10mm socket, our electric ratchet, some rivet removal tool, and we'll get to work. To get started, we're going to start by removing the rear panel, and then we'll remove the rest of the liner. We have a small plastic rivet located right here at the corner. I'm going to go and work that one out first. We have another one right up top. I get it a little started so we can slip our tool under it. All right. We have two 10mm plastic nuts that hold that in place. We're going to go ahead and zap them off with our 10mm socket on our electric ratchet. All right, now we have those pieces of hardware removed. You can leave this attached to the rest of the liner. We're going to go ahead and work our way to the front side where we have two more 10mm plastic nuts and a couple more rivets to remove. We have two rivets that attach here by the side skirt. We can start by removing those next. With those removed, we have two 10 plastic millimeter nuts that we want to remove next. Again, same 10 on this ratchet. And now with that hardware removed, we have one more sneaky bolt. We have an 8mm that sits behind the side skirt up right here that we're going to go ahead and zap off. And then we can start working our fender liner off. 8mm on the electric ratchet. All right. Now with that done, we can go ahead and work our fender liner off. So I'm going to start from the front and kind of work it off. You can see they're pretty flexible, they're pretty manageable. Be ready to have a lot of debris stored up in here if you haven't taken them off ever or in a long time. But now with that off, we can see our cabling that ruts up here. Let's go ahead and get ready to disconnect our shock. Now we're gonna go ahead and start by removing our cable that goes to our shock all the way up to the electrical housing. You're gonna wanna start at the shock body and work your way up. We have a locating tab right behind the wheel carrier that holds our cable in place. There is another plastic clip right above the axle that holds it in place, to which it then travels behind the fuel filler neck. There it goes underneath the fuel, or right above the fuel filler neck. All right, the one underneath the fuel filler neck is just clipped in. There's no latches or anything that hold it into place. Once you get to the front half of the wheel well, you have these plastic tabs that lock it in. Flathead screwdriver, small pick to pry them open. Pull the cable out. You have one more up top here. And then finally, we have our electrical housing up top. You want to remove this metal clip that locks them into place. I'm just using a flathead screwdriver, sticking it in and twisting over. We just need to undo the left side, so just one half is fine. Pull that out. And then these plugs just separate by pulling them away from each other. And with that, we have freed up our cable. Now it's just a matter of pulling it all the way back through to the shock body. All right, as you can see, it is very long. Mercedes did a really great job at routing this throughout the whole subframe, all the way up until the front of the wheel well. With that removed, we're gonna go ahead and raise the car up a bit more, or in your case, climb underneath it. We're gonna break free our lower strut bolt, or our lower shock bolt, and then we'll go from there. Next, underneath the car, we're gonna go ahead and remove this plastic cover from our lower spring arm. There's two locking tabs on the interior that hold this in place up here. I'll show them to you a little bit better when I pull it off. Just using a flathead screwdriver to pop them open. Pull them over. You can pull this side down. Then you want to pull off the flathead side off of the bolt, and the bolt end with the nut, and then these just pop off. So these two are what hold it at the end, and these are the two locking tabs that lock it up on the subframe side. Pretty straightforward, very simple. This just gives us a better view of the bottom of the shock body, where the hardware is. So while I have you here, we're gonna take our 16mm wrench. I have two of them, one I'm gonna counter hold with and one I'm gonna break that nut free with. So let's go ahead and do that first. 16 on both ends. Now we're just gonna zap the nut off, but we're not gonna remove the bolt. We'll get back to that in a little bit. So for now, counter hold the head, and we'll zap the nut off with a 16 on our electric ratchet. Cool, with that done, now let's head in the trunk of the car and work on dismantling our interior so we can get to the top of our shock. All right, at the trunk of the E63, we're gonna start by removing our trunk mat. Very straightforward, pull it out. There goes our lighting. With that removed, we're gonna wanna go ahead and remove this lower black trim right around the seal of the trunk. For that, I recommend either two small flathead screwdrivers or picks, whatever you have. Today I'm gonna be using two small picks. And we have two clips on either interior side and two at the bottom that hold this in place. So let's go ahead and get those off. We're gonna start on the passenger side and work our way around. 2 small picks. Pry that out a bit, and then you just keep working them out. Then there's the backing, which I recommend you pull out as well so you don't lose it. We're going to go ahead and repeat the process all the way across. With those removed, now you're going to want to start on either end. I'm going to start on the passenger end. You're just going to pop the sill off of the clip that is held on underneath the weather stripping. It's just press fit, so don't be afraid to pull it towards you, but don't pull it out all the way as we have electrical connectors behind either light. There's one. Do the same thing on the other side. There's 2. And then it's just a matter of disconnecting your electrical connectors for the lights. Just squeeze the little tabs on either side and pull off. Here's a better look at that piece outside the car. Again, light on one end, light on the other end. Pretty straightforward. With that, now we can focus on removing the side paneling so we can get to our strut tower, or shock tower in this case for the rear. So let's go ahead and do that. We have 2 T40s that we want to remove in the trunk, as they have a metal hook for attaching stuff in the trunk and a plastic surround trim on it. Our car is missing the forward one, so we're just going to remove the rearward one for now. I have a T40 on my 3/8 drive ratchet. Set that to the side with the rest of your hardware. We have 2 plastic rivets you're going to want to remove. One is located inside underneath the speaker deck. We have 1 more rivet by the door, by the trunk hinge. And then we have this plastic surround around the trunk hinge that you're just going to pop up, clipped into the carpet, and just set that up to the side. That'll stay with the car. Now with that removed, we can go ahead and pull down our panel so we can access our hardware. And now for that, we're just going to pull this fabric forward. And now we have all the access we need to get to our upper shock bolt. So let's grab our tools and work on getting that off. All right, we have our 16mm pass-through socket that we're going to set on our nut first with our ratchet. Then we have our counter hole tool. All right, we're going to rest that there. Here we have our nut, our washer, and our old bushing. Nice little suspension mount sandwich. Set this to the side as we have new hardware. Now we can head back underneath the car and work on pulling out our shock body. Now we're going to go ahead and remove that lower 16mm bolt and wrestle our shock body out. Here we go. Here is our old unit. So you can see this looks exactly like our new one. It has the lower rubber bushing already installed, which we'll show you how to install on the new one. So just hold tight. I'll grab that new one and we'll slip it in. All right, now we can go ahead and install our new shock body. Here's the shock. Here's one of the rubber bushings that come with it. This one has like a skirt almost around it that sits around this metal cup. Inside of there is our bump stop already installed from Bilstein directly. So we're just going to want to feed this in. Make sure that outer skirt sits on the outside of the cup, like so. And we'll go ahead and feed this in. We might have to compress it a little bit as we feed it in. So let's see how far we get, just like this. Okay. So what I did is I over compressed, so I had more than enough room to swing this in. And grab our 16mm bolt. We'll line up the shock body and feed it through on the lower control arm. Then we'll take our new locking 16mm nut, which is also included with the kit. We'll get that started by hand. And now we're gonna go ahead and get a little bit more underneath the W211. We're gonna set the car to roughly ride height, and then we'll go ahead and tighten that bolt and nut down and torque it up. All right, back underneath the W211, we have our screw jack set up. If you're working at home, you're gonna wanna use a floor jack. And to simulate ride height, Mercedes wants you to tighten whenever you're doing the bags or the shocks or the control arms. You want the axle to be at about 90 degrees horizontally. So that's what we have done here. We're gonna take our 16mm on our ratchet and our 16mm wrench to counter hold. And we're just gonna snug everything up first. Now we're gonna go ahead and tighten down our 16mm nut to 50 Newton meters plus 90 degrees. There's our 50. I'm gonna make a little mark. And we'll clock that nut another 90 degrees. All right. And then we'll go ahead and hit it with the paint mark. That way we remember it's torqued. Now, while I have you here, we're gonna go ahead and route the first part of this harness on the back of the knuckle, and then we'll get the car a little bit more eye level. We'll get the rest of that wrapped up, and then we'll go from there. I'm gonna start by feeding this cable over the carrier, but underneath the upper lower control arm, or I'm sorry, underneath the upper rear control arm. That first one there, go ahead and key it into this locating tab. All right, now let's get the car a little bit more eye level, and we'll work on routing the rest of the wiring. Now we're gonna go ahead and continue routing our harness here. Before we clip it in, we'll feed it over the fuel filler. Put that baby in right above the axle. And we'll clip it in right above the fuel filler neck tube. Then we want to feed it back over the fuel filler tube underneath the lower forward control arm. And there's a bracket in place there that we're going to want to clip the cable back into underneath the shield. Now what we'll do is we'll route it all the way up top and plug it in. Remember, you want to join it to the inside of this other connector. Send them home like that. Lock your locking tab in. And then it's just a matter of feeding the cables back into our 3 clips. Just gonna let them kind of go where they naturally want to sit. All right, with that hooked up, now we can go ahead and reinstall our wheel liner, and don't forget to reinstall your lower plastic cover on the lower control arm if you removed that earlier. Now we're gonna go ahead and wrestle our fender liner back in. Again, these are pretty flexible. You're not really gonna hurt them. Obviously that doesn't mean treat them poorly, but they're pretty malleable. Right now what I'm doing is I'm just tucking in that plastic lip on the inside of our fender well here. All right, now with that situated, we can start by installing our rivets, our 10mm plastic screws, or plastic nuts, And then we can't forget about that 8mm underneath. Just make sure your little axis panel is also latched into the wheel well. Sometimes they come undone, especially when you remove them like we did. There's two little locking tabs that key into this, so I may need to pull that rivet off. Now we can put in our last plastic 10mm nut. And then we just have that one 8mm bolt, and we're good on this side. Beautiful. With that wheel liner situated, now we're going to go ahead and get the car back down to the ground so we can hop into the trunk area one more time. We're going to use a floor jack to support our whole assembly and make sure our shock body is fully bottomed out on the bottom of the shocks tower. And then once we have that situated, we'll go ahead and attach the hardware, button everything back up, and get on with this DIY. Now we're going to go ahead and install the upper half of our shock mount bushings. Just like we took off, we're going to start with the rubber piece first, then our metal washer, and then our new locking nut. So you have your rubber bushing that goes over top. You have your metal washer. And you have your new locking nut. Now we're going to reverse our tools. So just one thing to note, which we just found out of right now, the new locking nut on the Bilstein unit is a 17. So if you're using the same kit as we are, you're going to want to make sure you have a 17mm pass-through. All right, that's going to do us here. This is nice and sandwiched. Now with that situated, we can go ahead and reinstall our carpeting and get one step closer to wrapping up this DIY. Down below here is where that second T40 is. As you can see, ours is missing all this around, which is why we didn't remove it, but typically you're going to have the same as you did on the trunk side of things. I'm going to go ahead and reinstall our T40. Again, 2 of them total if you removed both of them on your side. Now we can reinstall the surrounding trim around our hinge. It just kind of pops into place like that. Now we have our carpeting situated on the shock tower side of things. We can reinstall this lower trim. Start by connecting your electrical connectors. We have one more on the passenger side. Now we just feed it back into the little retaining tabs on either end. Now we can go ahead and install our 6 clips that we removed. They simply press in by hand. With that situated, the last thing to do back here is to reinstall our carpet. Boom, baby. With that situated, all we have left to do is put our wheel back on and torque it up. Now we can go ahead and throw our wheel back on. We'll get our nuts situated with the gun, just snugged up. Lug bolts in your case, if you have this traditional lug bolts on there still. I'm just gonna gently snug them up. With those snugged up, now we can go ahead and lower the car back down on the ground and torque them up. Now we can go ahead and torque these down to 100 foot-pounds or 135 Newton meters. You always want to make sure you torque them in a cross pattern. Beautiful. And there you have it, my good people, another DIY in the books. Overall, a very straightforward job on the W211. If you like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or comments on what we did today, or there's something you want to see specific on the W211, leave it in the comment box below. And if you like this DIY and you want to see more like them, please consider subscribing. We make new ones all the time. As always, thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.